the Eagleton Institute of Politics, and I am delighted to welcome you and our panelists to our morning after discussion. It's a long-time Eagleton tradition, where we have the opportunity to talk about what happened at the primary election and what we see going forward. I'm going to introduce each of our panelists, and then we'll get right into it. I'll go in alphabetical order, starting with Modia Butler. Mo Butler is a partner at Mercury Public Affairs. He's a public affairs expert with extensive experience in government relations, political campaigns, and strategic communications in New Jersey and Washington, D.C. At Mercury, he advises clients across various sectors, including government, real estate development, education, healthcare, infrastructure, and not-for-profits. Welcome, Mo, and thank you for being here.
Pleasure.
Next, we have David Cruz, senior political correspondent and anchor at NJ Spotlight. He is the moderator of Chatbox and Reporters Roundtable. He's been a member of the NJ Spotlight news team since 2011 and has been covering New Jersey's biggest stories for almost 30 years. He's been a reporter and moderator of public affairs programs on television, radio, and digital platforms for WBGO and WNYC Radio, and is the former editor-in-chief of the Hudson Reporter newspaper group. Welcome, David.
Hey, good morning, all.
Next, we have Joey Fox. He's the Washington, D.C. based reporter at the New Jersey Globe, covering federal politics and New Jersey's congressional delegation. He previously spent 2 years in Trenton covering state, federal, and local politics for the Globe. Welcome, Joey.
Thanks for having me.
And last but not least, we have Amanda Woloshen Glass. Amanda's senior vice president at Checkmate Strategies. She's a government affairs specialist and senior political strategist. She has managed and consulted on several congressional, state legislative, county, and local campaigns. Her extensive experience on Capitol Hill has fostered her strong working relationships with government and elected officials that bridge both sides of the aisle within New Jersey and beyond. Welcome, Amanda.
Thank you.
So let's get right into it. I think I'll start. I'm going to ask all of our panelists to just give, a brief overview of their key takeaways from last night's primary. Anything that surprised you, or really, the top lines, or anything you have a reaction to at all. I think I'll start with our reporters to give the sort of media perspective, and then we'll go to Mo and Amanda as the political strategist sort of reaction to that. So why don't we start with you, David?
Okay. I think the headline is probably no line, no problem. The organizations, we were discussing this all last night, and leading into the election as well, is the line the thing that is the main advantage that these organizations have? And it was a valid discussion. And I think that yesterday showed that the line was one of the tools in their toolbox, but the thing that they have, and you could probably see it most in North Hudson, where the political monster that is Brian Stack, mayor of Union City and powerful state senator, rallied troops almost like a military general on the weekend to, get out the vote. And I think it showed obviously in the results in the Hudson County race, where Rob Menendez won rather handily over Ravi Bala. So I think that, the big takeaway for us was that the organizations are still strong. And also that we don't really know what the impact of the death of the line is going to be until the next primary, because as you all know, this decision to kill the line came after everybody had filed their petitions and so on. So I think that we'll see the answer to that going forward. There are a couple races where we thought that we might see it this time around. The Passaic County race for sheriff, Jerry Speziale, who was more popular and I think better funded, lost. And there was a sense there that since there wasn't a line, that the advantage was going to go to, is it Adamo? I forget his name.
It's Adamo.
Yeah, that was going to happen, but it did not. And so Again, that was one small glimpse as to what the impact would be. But again, going forward, we're going to find out more about the impact of line versus, organization. And lastly, I'm sorry that Tammy Murphy didn't stay in the race, because that would have been a much more interesting race to see. And that would have been something to then start wondering if she won or lost because of or in spite of the line. That would have been a good test case. But so those are just some of my thoughts at what feels like 7 a.m.
Thank you so much. Joey?
Yeah, I mean, I think that my takeaways are in a lot of ways pretty similar. This was the first big test of New Jersey's democratic organizations in what may be sort of the new normal for New Jersey, and they kind of passed. They had a few races that people were really looking at. You had Rob Menendez versus Ravi Bala. You had the Passaic County Sheriff race. You had the race for Andy Kim's House seat, where Assemblyman Herb Conaway had party support across the board, but still had several very real opponents running against him. You had lots of other races that didn't attract a lot of attention, but county level races, town level races. And in the vast majority of them, the result that probably would have happened if the line had stayed in place still happened without it in place. I mean, I think that there was sort of a period earlier this year in sort of February or March, especially March, where it really seemed like all of the ramparts of New Jersey politics were falling, where you had this Senate race between Andy Kim and Tammy Murphy that was just taking the state by storm. Andy Kim was completely upending expectations about how these campaigns can be run. He was polling ahead of Tammy Murphy. He was winning all these county conventions against the wishes of party leaders. And he was winning eventually this lawsuit that for the county line. And just for clarity, for anyone who doesn't know the particulars, this court case specifically applied to this year's Democratic primary, but the judges in the case made it pretty clear that they don't think the line is constitutional. Technically, this case wasn't about determining its constitutionality, so that will have to wait in order to see what happens in future years. But just so we're sort of got a baseline on what that means. So I think that the real kind of revolution, I guess, was happening in February, March, where Andy Kim kind of boxed Tammy Murphy out of the race and brought down the line. And then now you're seeing the effects of that. Andy Kim obviously won the Democratic Senate primary in a landslide and is likely headed to be a U.S. senator. But you didn't necessarily see sort of the political revolution anywhere else. This is not a year that will go down necessarily as the year that New Jersey politics completely shifted. It's the year that shift started happening, that Andy Kim began his Senate career, presumably, the year that the line began its fall. But you're not seeing a huge turnover in the congressional delegation. You're not seeing any other crazy results. The one other thing that I would say is, so we saw on the Republican side, the Republican line was not struck down. And so their primary proceeded mostly as normal, and most of the results that you saw came as normal. But there was sort of an interesting test case where there were a couple of counties that even though they didn't have to get rid of the Republican line, they chose to anyways. The Burlington County clerk, who's a Democrat, just sort of decided unilaterally that, well, she's designing one type of ballot for Democrats, she wants to design that same type of ballot for Republicans too. And there is a congressional primary, this is for Andy Kim's seat, that covers part of Burlington County. And in that congressional primary, there was one guy, Rajesh Mohan, who had the line across the board, but there was no line in Burlington County. And in Burlington County, he's actually losing to an off-the-line competitor. Let's see, I'm looking at the results right now, 34 to 30. But then in the two other counties where the line actually stayed in place, he's winning 52 to 27 and 51 to 20. So this is just, it's not a very high profile primary, but I think it's a really interesting test case where you're directly seeing, here's what a primary with the line looks like, and then the exact same primary with the exact same candidates without the line. And there actually is a big difference. So there's no question that the line is a very important part of New Jersey politics. And if it dies in the long term, that's a huge deal. There will be lots of knock-on effects from that. But as just sort of to wrap it all up, as David said, it's not enough on its own. And candidates can't count on a fairer ballot alone to do the work of winning for them. You're still going to have party organizations pushing back. You're still going to have lots of money. You're still going to have institutional support that the line is only one small part of. And that's, I think, what you really saw last night.
Thank you for that. Amanda, I'm actually going to turn to you because we were talking right before we got on this webinar exactly about this. And I'm curious then, if you want to, and you should add any other thoughts you have about the election, but if you want to continue this sort of line of thought about the party line.
I do, Jean. Thank you. And to follow up on David and Joey, that was the one thing I was specifically looking for last night, was to see how the line would perform. And just stepping back for a moment, for those who are not in the inner circle or are able to pay attention to it, the county line, for those who don't know or don't understand how it changed, and Joey did update us on that, is the preferential line placement for party organizations. So when you go in and vote in a primary, the organization would have this endorsed slate of candidates right down from top to bottom. Republicans would have theirs and Democrats would have theirs on their ballot. Due to Congressman Kim's lawsuit with the primary, that was deemed unconstitutional, or at least on hold for now for this specific race, but it was narrow, so it didn't affect the Republican. We still had a line. I'm a Republican, I'm operative. So the Republicans had a line, which we'll talk about in a moment, but the Democrats didn't. And I found it very interesting to watch the results last night. And I think the main question was, would the organization support and the rank and file, party machine, whatever you want to call it, would it be able to hold out and get their endorsed candidates across the finish line? And it proved out that they did a very good job. I think most of the party endorsed candidates still won, and handily. So that was the first test to see how that would break down. Now, going forward with more preparation, if this goes forward, and we'll see if it applies to the Republicans in the future, and is it a foretelling, but is it will that pan out in the future? Will advance notice and candidates knowing that there won't be a preferential line for party endorsed candidates? It'll certainly bring more candidates to the table, but it doesn't excuse the need for funding, name ID. You still have to communicate your message. Instead of relying upon the convention process, which most counties and on either side of the party rely upon. Once you get endorsed, you're part of that team, and voters who go to vote look for their line, and unless they're specifically interested, they vote their line. Now we're going to have to really pay attention and communicate with those voters the message and why they should vote for us, and that costs money, and name ID also helps. So I think this has been an interesting test, and the Democrats certainly, the organization did a great job getting their voters out, without a doubt. But what's to come, and how will it apply to the Republicans potentially in the future? And we also saw, just kind of get away from the line a little bit, on the Republican side, the Senate candidates. One thing we know is whether it's a Democrat or a Republican, we're going to have a South Jersey senator for the first time since the 1950s. I think I saw last night on the reporting that this is the first South Jersey candidate to South Jersey candidate in 100 years. So that's exciting, regardless what side of the aisle you're on. And what was the implication of President Trump's endorsement in the Republican race? You had Christine Glassner receiving Trump's endorsement kind of at the end, which diminishes the effect for sure. And then you have Curtis Bashaw, the businessman who did prevail last night with the funding to be able to communicate his message. So it will, I'm sure, begin to talk about that more as we go forward. But I think it was an exciting night, and it's going to be an exciting election season.
Thank you, Amanda. Mo.
Well, it's sort of echoing some of the comments that both David and Joy made earlier. I'll start with the race that I found the most interesting and I paid particular attention to for sort of reasons that Joey spoke to earlier. It's a sort of microcosm of all these dynamics that have taken place throughout the state. It's all like sort of centered there in Hudson County in the CD8 race. As David alluded to, and Brian Stack, we trust. That race had intrigue, drama. What would the loss of the line mean, as Amanda was referring to? How would Senior impact Junior? And there was a lot of scuttlebutt around that, and not many people knew what that would be, and there wasn't much polling to provide direction on that. And ultimately, would this be sort of the beginning of the end of the powerful Democratic county organization? And I'll start with that last question first. As David said, the New Jersey county-based political machine is alive and well. For Mayor Bala to be successful in his CD8 challenge, he had to make sure he did really well in his hometown, Hoboken. Hope that Jersey City put up numbers for him, and that there was some atrophy with the county-based organizations. And if you look at the numbers, Robbie held up well where he was supposed to hold up well. He won his town with a 1,200 vote plurality. He won Jersey City with a 2,000 vote plurality. Uh, but if you look at the rest of sort of the organization, back counties and municipalities, the numbers that were run up were pretty astounding. Rob Menendez won Union County by 1,200 votes. He won Newark. I think represents East and North wards of Newark by 1,000 vote plurality. And then you get to North Bergen and Saco and that organization. The plurality there was 1,800. And then in that I alluded to in Brian Stack We Trust, he won Union City with a 4,000 vote plurality. I mean, that's darn near impossible to sort of overcome. So which brings me to another point. So the machine is alive and well, and Brian Stack We Trust. And then you begin to look at what happened throughout the rest of the state, which David alluded to. In Passaic County, there was a lot of question around the John Curry organization, leadership. If Director Spezial was able to pull that off, what would that mean to the organization moving forward? A lot of folks thought that at least one commissioner seat would be lost. I think people thought that Duffy may pull one out, and that Spezial had the name recognition and had the money to be able to pull off the win. And without the line, it seemed like the Democratic organization didn't have the cover. John Curry and Democratic organization clean sweep. I don't think anybody saw that coming. So you see that in Passaic County. You see what Herb Conway did in Burlington County. I mean, again, the county organizations showed up and showed out for Herb Conway. And then you have these little smaller races. In Essex County, in the township of Bloomfield, the county organization went all in for Jenny Mundell. They sent the county executive's chief of staff to go in to be the campaign manager. All their top troops went in there, and she won pretty handily. So, I look at all of that, and I say, again, that the machine coming out, at least the last night's election, is alive and well.
Thank you for that. There's a lot of different questions I have, but one to follow up and sort of continue with this, the party line is still the party machine is still alive and well. I mean, and I think you've all alluded to this in different ways. What really remains to be seen is what happens going forward, because we were ready in the middle of an election season, and a lot of the party-backed candidates had momentum and fundraising and some of this going in, which certainly gave them. They may have lost on the Democratic side. They may have lost, the ballot line advantage, but they still had advantages in other ways. And I'm just, sort of curious if any of you have thoughts on. Do you see? I mean, I think Joey, you had a good example of that one race where there was, you could see the difference in the ballot advantage. Do you see this changing, at least chipping away in at least the candidates that run, and some of the other sort of ways that this tests the limits, assuming that the party line is struck down permanently going forward? What does this mean? What should we be looking for in 2025?
I mean, I think that the biggest thing that we should be looking for is candidate recruitment. Are people stepping up to challenge the line, and are those people real candidates who can actually give them a run for their money? I mean, so I did not get I'm not originally from New Jersey. I'm from New York City, and I spent a couple of years sort of more in the New York politics scene than the New Jersey politics scene. And New York, obviously, like every other state, doesn't have a county line, doesn't have anything like that. But as with politics anywhere, institutional support still matters. If you can get an endorsement from the outgoing assemblyman or city councilwoman or whatever, or if you can raise more money than your opponent because you're tied to the unions, or like all these things still matter, because that's just how politics works. In New Jersey, institutional support comes with, or historically came with, this very specific advantage of the ballot, but it also came with all kinds of this whole other universe of advantages that exist everywhere else too. And anyone who wants to challenge the party organization is still going to have to deal with all of those things. I think the question is, now that you no longer have the stifling of the line, and I think that was the biggest thing, and these sort of lower profile primaries for things like state legislature and county commissioner, the thing that would happen is, a county commissioner would retire, say, the county party would gather and choose its preferred candidate. And it would just be a little bit insane to sort of challenge whoever that choice was, because you'd be off the line, you'd have presumably very few resources, you'd be shut out by everyone and everything. And then what would it get you? You would end up getting like 23% of the vote, and unless you had a really, really compelling campaign or something. And then that would be the end of it. And so the question now is, that could still happen in certain cases. People still lose elections and landslides all the time to the party organization. The question is whether that initial stifling effect still takes place, or whether, and I think you are immediately seeing it potentially in 2025 with the entire state assembly up, with certain people like Steve Fulop, who's running for governor, threatening to bring a broader challenge to the party establishment, whether in the next 6 or 7 months, you see real formidable candidates start to step up and say, now that we're in this new situation, we're going to actually bring the challenge to these party organizations' front doors. And if they do that, then there's certainly a real possibility that they win.
I think what's interesting, if you look to the Republican races last night, you look at the Senate race, you'll see that the candidates, the counties that endorsed either Bashaw or Glassner, it held out, right? So if they were endorsed by a specific county, and they won that county, right? And that's what you count on, is that even if you're unable to raise a significant amount of money, or you have name ID, if you're on the preferential line, the Republicans, especially in large turnout elections, in presidentials and federal election years, where more people come out who sometimes pay less attention to lower ticket races or local races, they'll look for the line because they trust their party, they're partisans, but it helps. So when we have candidates, if we don't, let's go with the premise that we won't have lines going forward, you're going to need to either have funding, strong organizations, clearly. So no longer would you be able to be an organization and not be a strong organization. You need to raise money. You need to be able to communicate with your machine to be able to drive out the vote. So yes, I think the organizations can still be strong. We saw it last night with the Democrats, but they're strong organizations. So no longer will a line help you get your candidates across the way we have relied upon it in the past in some instances. And certainly not all counties have a line. Morris, Sussex has a slogan, but not a, this is for the Republicans I'm speaking to. But you will have to recruit candidates that are going to have strong grassroots, strong funding, built-in name ID. It opens it up, but it is not easy finding funds to communicate with voters. So you automatically lose that advantage if you're endorsed, because when you're seeking an endorsement from the party, the pool of people you have to influence or communicate with is much smaller. We're talking about hundreds, not tens of thousands in a primary. So while it opens it up for candidates to have a fair playing field, it comes with the burden of actually having to raise money and run a strong campaign to get your message across. It's a fair playing field, but only as far as the organization or the campaign can produce.
For that. The one other aspect I just want to touch upon with the party line is, how the voters feel about it. And if this, it sort of remains to be seen more broadly, but I was at a conference earlier this year with a bunch of state legislators from other states, and they, all of them were like, what's, seeing the headlines, what's going on? What is this ballot line in New Jersey? And it was such a foreign concept to them. And I'm not sure people in New Jersey realize just how unusual it is, And so it's hard to say. I don't know if this is really a question or if you have any thoughts on this, but if it might be inspiring, if in addition to candidate emergence, this feeling of I have to actually think a little, do a little bit more research, or it might just engage people in the process more, or if voters, primaries are hard in general for voter turnout, but I just sort of big picture going into, will they feel like, the deck isn't stacked already, that there is potentially the option, for a wider pool and all of that. I don't know if any of you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that what's interesting is that, here we thought that the way our ballots were designed were normal, but they were actually abnormal. And like the majority of people do it the way we did it yesterday. I know my mom lives in Pennsylvania, and that's what her ballot looks like, the ballot I filled out the other day. So I do think, and this is just anecdotal, I do think that people feel more empowered. I think there has to be an education piece to this as well, though, because I know there were a number of voters that were just, you've been fed a steady diet of a certain thing for decades, and without much training, sort of acclimation, you show up to a polling place and the ballot looks dramatically different. Like people were really, literally, like I live in Essex County, and it's line A is like a brand. Right? So it's like line A all the way. And you take that away, especially from elderly voters, so right, it becomes more confusing. So the education piece, which I would argue was lacking as we're heading into this election, is going to be critical to sort of get us, make us not abnormal, make us normal, and make sure that people understand what how the ballot is, how it works, how it looks, and people become familiar with it.
I had a couple of thoughts, just touching on just what we were talking about a minute ago about candidates and how candidates matter more now, theoretically. Party leaders don't recruit you because you're Andy Kim or Cory Booker, right? Parties and organizations recruit you because you're a good team player and you follow the county line, not the literal one, but the county line, as it were. And so I think that the lack of a line will create more candidates. And I think people with name ID and money are more likely, we're more likely to see more of them than we are necessarily going to see better candidates, particularly if we expect party organizations to recruit more broadly. I don't anticipate that being a big goal for them necessarily. Also, I mean, everybody's a reformer until they become an incumbent. And so I think that you'll see people less passionate about killing obstructions to democracy once they're in office. That's my slightly cynical guess about that. And so I think that, again, it all remains to be seen, but those are some things that maybe a slightly cynical point of view, but I don't see that the candidates necessarily will be better while they may be more plentiful. And then also never underestimate the power of party organizations to figure out a workaround for whatever the new rules are. Essex County has an amazing way of making sure that the line lives, because it lived this year. If you look at the ballot, it was 1A across the line. All of the favored candidates were kind of on the literal same line. It was just horizontal. So that was some of my thoughts on that.
The one thing that, because I've seen that claim about Essex, the one thing that sort of disputes that a little bit is that maybe the most important candidate, or the candidate in the most competitive race in Essex this year, Rob Menendez, actually was not part of that. He didn't get first position. He got third. Yeah. So yes, there were certain ballots, like if you lived in Mikey Sherrill's district, in certain parts of Mikey Sherrill's district, you would have every single Essex Democratic candidate was listed at the top, but it was definitely not in every district. So I don't necessarily think that was entirely some chicanerous plot to make that happen. One quick thing that I'll add to Mo's point as well about voter education. I mean, who knows precisely how every voter reacted to these new ballots, many of whom probably have never seen a ballot like this before, people who have been voting in New Jersey their whole lives. But there is some evidence that voters kind of figured it out, or at least that the county parties were able to help them figure it out. I think in Camden County is the clearest evidence for that. There was a six-way race for 3 county commissioner seats, where you had the organization candidates and the progressive, renegade candidates. And the way that the ballot draw shook out, the organization candidates were listed 2nd, 4th, and 5th, I believe. So they're scattered oddly, and you would have to specifically pick and choose to find the proper candidates. And voters did. They voted for all 3 organization candidates at pretty similar rates. There didn't seem to be a whole lot of confusion about, how do I do this? How do I find these candidates? Because presumably Camden Democrats sent out lots of mailers and saying, here's how you do it. And this is what the ballot is going to look like. So I absolutely think that voter education is part of this, but I also think voters are pretty smart, especially primary voters who tend to be tend to be more involved, tend to be better educated, tend to know what's going on more. So I think that Camden County result shows that even for voters who have never experienced something like this before, they can work it out. I trust them.
Just some of the party hand wringing over, will they be able to figure it out and really play out, right? Yeah. So
yeah, it's interesting. Like I saw Joey, I saw the result. Sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah, sorry. Were you about to say something, Amanda?
Okay, yeah, I saw the results in you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, yes. Go ahead, Mo.
Go ahead, Mo.
Okay. I saw the results in I'm talking. You can't hear me? You guys can hear me?
You're hearing yourself, I think, a little bit.
Yes.
If you were on the radio, they would say, turn your radio down.
But we can hear you if you want to talk. Try talking.
All right. Perfect. Okay. In CD8, to your point, Joey, in CD8, in the Newark section, JC had preferred. He had the preferred placement on the ballot. I think he was, I forget which one. I know he was A, and he got just as many votes essentially as Robbie Bala, who had $2 million, right? Mailers, text messages, the full arsenal. And I think the takeaway from a lot of sort of the party people there was that seeing a lot of seniors were just confused. This new ballot, they didn't really understand it, and there wasn't enough education going in. And that's where that preferential treat, that wasn't preferential treat, where he was at on the ballot was helpful. That was at least the early takeaway from that.
Also on this education question, I think that party organizations, I'm going to sound like the guy who bashes party organizations, but they're not so interested in voter education as they are in voter compliance. I remember back in the day, there used to be line in Hudson County and even in local races. But every once in a while, instead of it would be all A down the line, you'd have somebody who ended up, because for some freak of something or other, they were on B or even C. They would make sure that the palm cards went out with the very specific numbers and letters of who went where. And so that wasn't necessarily teaching voters how to navigate ballots. It was more about find who we need you to find the guy who's in blue or whatever. And so I think that's an important thing to make as we an important point to make as we consider how, again, the parties are going to work around the new landscape.
Well, I think that many people rely on that party endorsement or imprimatur that they look for. They consider themselves, especially primary voting Democrats or Republicans, they consider themselves part of this organization because they are. So they trust. And when there isn't that endorsement or line, it's confusing. It can be confusing and it takes time. Now I run races across the country where there are no lines. We're the oddity to most point. And still endorsements matter. And you still want your party's club or county party's endorsement or local elected official, and you have to communicate it. So that's what, if the line is dissolved across party lines, you'll see more of that. We're not going to say that county parties don't matter as much. They just have less power. But they will still need the organization to get their candidates across the line, which means good candidates, good grassroots, good fundings, the kind of keystones of all campaigns to begin with. So that'll certainly be the stress test there. And we'll see. It's communicating with the voters who come out, and it's going to take more of that and stronger organizations, or keeping the organizations as strong as they are, to make sure that the locals still know what the deal is. But it does give other candidates who are not part of that structure opportunities to communicate. And I've won races off the line, and I've been beaten on the line. So it does happen. It's not unheard of. It just takes great campaigns. And sometimes it's an albatross. Sometimes you want to be the outsider running in certain years. So sometimes there's a benefit to being off the line, and we see it all the time. It certainly shakes things up and makes things interesting regardless, but it always comes down to good candidates with good campaigns and the right message.
Thank you for that. I'm not sure, we might have briefly lost Mo, but I think he might, hopefully he'll be back.
No, I'm here. I'm here.
Okay, good. That's good. I want to turn to the, marquee race this year going into the general election, which is, the U.S. Senate race. So now we have Andy Kim is favored to win, but at the moment, I think for all the big political, crystal balls, but we do have this situation where Senator Menendez has said he may run as an independent. He's filed to run as an independent, depending on what happens. And I'm curious what all of your take is on this, and what we should be looking for in the next several months.
I'll jump in. I've been covering Menendez since he was in the assembly, I think, many years ago. And he is a guy who will not let go sometimes until you
Clearly
pull him off the bone. But I think the bottom line is that he's going to be found guilty in this trial, and that's going to make the rest of it moot, I think. Were he to be an actual candidate, I think his impact would have been more if potentially more if Tammy Murphy was the Democratic candidate. I think Andy Kim is a much stronger candidate. But look, if Bob Menendez runs, if he's exonerated and he runs, 8-10% of a vote could be quite significant. I don't think Curtis Bashaw is, a great candidate per se. His profile for Republicans in New Jersey is about on brand for what we're used to seeing of Republican candidates in New Jersey. But Andy Kim is a little bit of like a rock star. As many people I think know him around the country as do here in New Jersey. He's got the enduring image of cleaning up after the insurrection in January of whatever that was, 20. But I think that it's going to be difficult for Republicans, particularly if Curtis Bashaw, to unseat him. But I don't think Menendez makes it to the ballot in the fall.
Yeah, let's assume he does, right, Dave? If Andy Kim obviously is formidable, he's a clear front runner, but if you have Menendez in, that clearly that's not helpful.
Yeah.
Andy still has some work to do with sort of those folks we were talking about earlier, sort of Democratic county-based party brokers. I know that there's still some work that has to be done there. I think he recognizes that, and I think the party leaders recognize that as well. But listen, Curtis Bashaw he's a credible candidate. He's a likable person. He, like you said, he is more sort of mainstream New Jersey Republican. So it's a real race. So Andy will want everything to be clicking for him to be in the appropriate position to be strong this November. And any of those things aren't, we have a more competitive election than I think he would like.
I jump in there for a second. No, I think Curtis is an interesting candidate for the Republicans. And typically with primaries, you'll see the more firebrand folks come out, and they're the more conservatives typically. So you usually see a more conservative candidate coming out of the primary. Curtis is moderate. He's a businessman. I think a lot of people know his hotel in South Jersey, and he has a good story. But he is moderate. I think he represents more of the broader base of the Republican base. He's gay, and I think people are excited that we have somebody that's going to be able to have a broader appeal going into the general election. And with Senator Menendez running and still having a solid base of supporters, I'm sure it could make things interesting. We haven't, as Republicans, elected a senator since 1972, so I understand it's an uphill battle, but I think Curtis is a great candidate, and the Republicans are excited to get started with the race and drawing some contrast. And I know Andy Kim, he's a nice guy, but he's also a tough fighter. And you see the race that he put together with the governor's wife, which isn't easy, and he came out victorious. So I think I'm really I'm looking forward to seeing what plays out. But I wouldn't sleep on it. I think it could be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that I think both parties put sort of one of their best feet forward in this, where they each found candidates who fit a profile that they kind of like and that is kind of appealing in a general election. Although I noticed a kind of funny quote from Andy Kim this morning. Every person every Republican he's defeated in his congressional races for the House has been a self-funding businessman, oftentimes who is involved in sort of like the development sphere, or the opponent he beat in 2022 ran like a yacht company. And so now he's moving up to Senate, and he's got his fourth Republican opponent in a row who matches that profile. So he does know the playbook for winning those races. And at the end of the day, like even when both parties are nominating pretty strong candidates, New Jersey Democrats just start with a much higher ceiling and a much bigger cushion than Republicans. That's just as a pretty basic fact. I mean, there hasn't been a Senate race. Republicans haven't won a Senate race in 50 years. There hasn't been a Senate race within single digits in the last couple of decades even. You saw in 2018, after Bob Menendez beat his first corruption trial, Republicans really put kind of all they had into that race, and they came up short by 11 points. Would Democrats prefer Bob Menendez stay out of it? Yeah, because he would be a headache if he was running as an independent in the general election. Who knows what his effect would be? I think it would certainly make Andy Kim have to work harder for it. But there's definitely a cushion there that I think would ultimately, even if everything were to go right for Curtis Bashaw, I think it would still be an uphill climb. And I kind of think that, I mean, you called this sort of the marquee race of the state. I don't know if that's fully true. There's a really, really competitive House race, Tom Kean Jr. versus Sue Altman, that I don't know. If Bob Menendez is running again, I think there'll be a huge media frenzy. I think the national media will get really invested in that. It'll be a whole story. But at the end of the day, I think the one that actually might have more of an effect on control of Congress is the Kean versus Altman House race, and that matchup was set last night. So I'll be watching that very closely too.
Well, that was actually a perfect segue for me, because I was about to ask about that race, and I don't know if any, the rest of you have thoughts on it, but it is a race to watch. I mean, obviously, at the Center for American Women in Politics, if Sue Altman were to prevail, it would be another woman in Congress, and we currently have two. We've never had more than two, so that would be interesting from that perspective. We've never had more than two serving at the same time, I should be clear. I don't know if you all, when you just said you're watching it, Joey, if the rest of you have any thoughts about that race or what you expect to happen or anything interesting you're looking at there.
I mean, I would just agree with what Joey said there, that it is a much more consequential race in the sense that the House is so much more divided, and the numbers there are much closer. I think Sue Altman is an interesting character. You kind of saw her coming from way back in the earliest days when she took over from Ana Lilia Mejias at Working Families. She does kind of tend to, I think, rub some people the wrong way with her earnestness, but maybe that really works well in that district where the incumbent is invisible for the most part. And I think that something that's kind of been a low simmering theme throughout this cycle and even the previous one is Republicans, by and large, run and hide from, I think it's a strategy. They run and hide from press, legitimate press. And I think that they don't realize how much that really hurts them. And I think for Tom Kean, if he tries to do it again in the fall, it would backfire on him. And I think that for Christine Serrano, she wrapped herself in the cloak of Donald Trump, but they couldn't get that message out to anyone. I mean, it was a little late and she was underfunded, but we, for instance, offered them free media. Come on, we're doing a package on this race. come and talk to us, and literally silence from their press people. And it was the same thing with Tom Kean Jr. when he was running. So, that's something that that Tom Kean is going to have to work on, because Sue Altman is, for whatever you think of her, she's relentless.
Yeah, she's going to bring the fight to him. I mean,
yeah.
Sue Altman to me is a fascinating figure. To watch the evolution of Sue Altman from, as you mentioned earlier, David, from working families, was a Working Families Party, to now the congressional candidate in that district that, on the Democratic side, that's going to be taking on Congressman Tom Kean. I to be frank, I didn't necessarily 3 years ago, if you had told me this would have been sort of the scenario, and she would be a congressional candidate and she would have the backing of Union County, I would have said, what planet do you live on? But to watch her evolution and how she's grown in her role as the standard bearer, the team she's put together. Listen, there's no way that Congressman Kean will be able to run and hide from Sue Altman. And I think you're right, Joey. It is the race to watch. Now, listen, there's a natural advantage that Tom Kean has in that district. So the key will be how she's able to overcome that natural advantage. But I do, as you alluded to, there's no way that Congressman Kean will be able to run and hide from a Sue Altman. It's going to be a real race.
I think jump in there for a second, because this is kind of my backyard. I ran races in this district for the better part of over a decade, starting with Congressman Mike Ferguson through Congressman Leonard Lance, and the district's only gotten stronger for Republicans after recent census redistricting. So I think the district as a whole is certainly favorable to the Republicans, and given that fact, Sue Altman is no moderate. So to appeal to Republicans with a more liberal candidate is not something that you would choose. So I think they're in a tough spot. It's places like Hunterdon and Somerset and Warren counties. These are Republican areas. So you would need a candidate that would have some cross appeal. I'm not sure that Sue has that cross appeal in those Republican areas, and it's a strong district. So just from my background, we ran and won in that district for years, and it was not as favorable. So it's more favorable now. So I think it's unlikely that Democrats pick up that seat. I think Tom Kean's in pretty good shape.
Mo made a comment about the evolution of Sue Altman. I think this is a perfect example. Maybe a couple of weeks ago was National Law Enforcement Day or something like that. And Sue Altman tweeted out, supporting our police officers and so on. And this is a woman who was right at the center of defund the police just a few years ago. And the tweet even had some Democrats saying, like, wait a minute, what? So, you know that you're trying to do something when that kind of a tone shift becomes part of your pitch.
Right. I just want to remind, we have about 10 minutes or so left. I want to remind the audience, if you have questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A box on your screen. I wanted to ask about the special election coming up in July in the 10th Congressional District. What do you have your eyes on? What are you thinking? What are you seeing? What are you hearing about that race?
Well, I'll say, since you noted the Center for American Women in Politics, Sue Altman could be, if she wins, she could be the third female member of the congressional delegation, but she could actually be beaten to that by one of many candidates in the 10th district. So this is a race that was triggered by the death of Donald Payne Jr. And it's sort of taking place under odd circumstances, where there will be a primary and a general election for the remaining 3 months or so of Payne's term, but then party leaders will just sort of decide at a convention who will get the nomination for the full term. But there might be some pressure for them to wait until after the primary and then just pick the primary winner. I don't know. It's still all up in the air right now. But I think going back to, not to endlessly bring things back to sort of the strength of organizations in the line, this will be another interesting test to see how organizations do in this new normal in New Jersey. And ironically, this race is actually not affected by the anti-line lawsuit at all. But there will still be no line because it's going to be the only race on the ballot. And the county line only derives its power from grouping its candidates together. If you only have one race with 11 candidates all running separately, then there's no line to speak of anyways. So most party leaders have gotten behind Newark City Council President LaMonica McIver, but there are several other sitting and former elected officials in the race. There's a state economic development official who's already spending like more than $100,000 on ads, which could be really impactful in a race where people don't really know much about the candidates yet. So I think over this sort of 1.5-month sprint to the July 16th primary, the question is, can LaMonica McIver go from, Central Ward Councilwoman in Newark, decently well-known political figure there, but not any kind of national figure or even district-wide figure? Can she go from that to congressional frontrunner? Can she solidify that? Can she marshal these organizations behind her to make it into, this oddly timed summer special election? Can she turn that into something that she can win, or is she going to face actual trouble from one or more of these other candidates who are running without party support? But how much does party support really mean in an election like this?
Yeah, I think that's spot on, Joey. And then the other interesting thing for me is the blending of two organizations that aren't always aligned with one another, right? So you have the county organization led by Chairman Jones, and you have the Newark political organization led by the mayor. This is one of the few instances where they've come together in alignment, in how trust and divvying up of labor and resources, and so, like, will that be seamless? Like, for her to be successful, I would argue that it would need to be somewhat seamless, or will it not be? And so I think that's another interesting thing to me. But she has the institutional organizational support, which should be extremely helpful in a mad sprint to an election in July where most people won't be at the beach, to be frank. They're not going to be voting. Someone told me these, an election like this is a selection, it's not an election. And then you have those interesting characters you're talking about. So, like Darryl Godfrey, who put his own money in, he's already on, I don't think he's on TV. I don't know if he's on TV or not, but I know he has ads out there. He has a digital program. We have Brittany Claybrooks, former East Orange council person, who was Andy Kim's North Jersey political director for a bit. So she's in the race. She has some credibility. You have a former Donald Payne staffer that's in the race. So you have the mayor of Linden, I think, Mayor Armstead is in the race. So it's an interesting group of Jerry Walker from Jersey City. So it's an interesting group of people. But I think that I think all things being equal, I think that LaMonica McIver just has a natural advantage.
And to Mo's point, special elections are complicated, and it is much more difficult. The county support or the organization support is very important, because as it is, it's hard to get people to vote. Try in the middle of the summer when people aren't used to voting. It's very difficult. So the more support you have and the more party organization you have to bring out the base is invaluable. But with lower turnout elections, it's easier to tip the scales. So if you have a well-organized, well-funded candidate, there is potential there. So it's fascinating. It's interesting. Sometimes there are surprises, but you definitely want as much organization support as possible for these races that really are on the radar.
I think this is the first standalone congressional special election in New Jersey in something like 70 years. So we are kind of literally in unprecedented territory where there's pretty much no voters anywhere in the state who have experienced this before, unless they moved from another state where there was a special election. So, I mean, just to quickly add that, we really don't know what voter turnout patterns are going to look like or how voters are going to react, because we have no actual precedent for it.
And the more candidates, again, we're splitting up high, so it's just anything can happen.
There are 11, I think 12 total candidates. I think 11 on the Democratic primary side. I mean, it's a lot. Yeah.
I would just say two things about that. One, a sprint with so many people is really unpredictable. And it's not like the people in this race are just gadflies. There's people of substance here,
Yes.
who are looking to raise money and, in fact, raising money. And the other thing is the Newark organization has not had to work really hard since after Mayor Baraka's first win. Turnout has been low. His pluralities may have been really high, but if you want to, you won, but only 10 people voted. What did you win? And so I think in this particular race, we'll see if Baraka, who I don't even know is going to be able to put together a statewide organization to run for governor, but that's a whole other thing. The question is, does he still got it in Newark, and can he put his person into where he wants that person to be? I'm not sure. I mean, the jury's still out on that, I think.
Thank you all for that. We are almost at time, but I want to close this with a final question. We're at the Eagleton Institute of Politics here on Rutgers University's campus. And we really obviously study and pay attention to youth engagement in politics. And so sort of thinking about, there have been some recent efforts to lower the voting age for school board elections. I know that there's an effort going on in New Jersey for that. What do you think we could do to engage more young people? Where are they in all of this? Looking ahead, and we do have a big presidential election this year, obviously, but what would you say would be something you're looking at in terms of getting more young people engaged in politics?
Joey, you're the young one.
I mean, I think what I'll say is that anybody who thinks that they have sort of this one simple trick will do it is lying to you and themselves. I just like every sort of rule like that you would think you would follow in terms of, if you support this policy, then the youths will finally come out. Well, not always. If you run young candidates, then the youths will finally come out. Well, I mean, like the most popular candidate among young Democratic voters in recent times has been Bernie Sanders, who's in his 80s. So there's absolutely no guarantee of that. I think that these ideas about lowering the voting age they're certainly not wrong-headed, and I think that they have some significant benefits. But just giving people more opportunities to vote, or giving people who didn't previously have the opportunity to vote the opportunity to, does not necessarily make them want to vote. It simply gives them the option. And these school board races, if they already only have 5% turnout, lowering the voting age by 2 years, okay, great, you got like 16-year-olds to vote. What did that ultimately do? So sorry to be very pessimistic in my answer, because I know I just said a whole bunch of nots instead of a lot of yeses, but there's no one formula for it. I was talking to a friend yesterday who I have perennial problems making sure that she votes, and she lives in the 8th congressional district. So her vote actually mattered quite a bit this year. She did ultimately vote at the last minute. She was able to get to a polling place like in her building. So good for her. But, my own experience with friends, some of them are very committed to it. Some of them forget all the time. Some of them don't really see a candidate or a message that particularly appeals to them, and that kind of throws them out of the loop. So there is no one solution. I think people can keep on trying to sort of hack away at that issue. But there's not going to be a silver bullet that suddenly makes the youths finally care about politics.
I think Joe's right. My former boss, Congressman Lance, used to say, where you sit is where you stand in life. So I don't think it's a monolith. I think life happens, and you realize that your vote's kind of important, and the things that happen around you matter. So whether it's you can't find a job, or you're worried about your student loans, or the economy's hurting your parents, I think life happens and it gets people engaged. And as things happen, you'll see candidates like Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump, youth coming out for atypical people. You wouldn't expect those candidates would be the most appealing to young people. But again, it's the right message for where you are in life.
Yeah, I mean, I think there will be elections where youth vote is energized because of either a candidate or a particular issue. But I don't think that, like seniors, for instance, right, or soccer moms, who are an actual block of voters who do participate more regularly, regardless of what the main issues are, they're sort of already part of the process. I don't think that young people care enough a lot of times because they got a lot of other stuff to do. And I think that they have as cynical, if not more cynical view about government and government's ability to do anything good for them. And so you got to find someone, I think Andy Kim has a little bit of appeal to youth, but you got to find someone who speaks to them, but then as Joey said, they'll go gaga for Bernie Sanders. So go figure.
I know.
Joey,
Yeah, sorry, go on.
Joey totally depressed me. I was waiting for an answer from Joey, and he totally depressed me.
Joey, you broke Mo.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry for my pessimistic dispatch from the youths. We apologize collectively.
And something that we haven't discussed today, there's a lot of things, is vote by mail voting, right? And how does that affect bringing different bases out on election day or election season now? Is there a way that we can meet them where they are and make it more, one, accessible and appealing to vote, right? So that'll factor in at some point, especially as we go forward. Last night, again, the amount of early voting was remarkable going into this, and we could pretty much call some of these races before the polls even closed, and I think we'll see more of that. So
maybe vote by phone.
Oh my God.
Well, we're just about over time. I want to thank all of you for being here. This was great. I know you're all tired and busy, and it's been a busy week and busy day yesterday, and so we really, really appreciate it. So thank you so much. Thank you to the audience for joining us, and we will be keeping an eye on everything, and we look forward to staying in touch with all of you.
Thanks all.
Thank you
So much.
Thank you all. Take care.